Hi, everybody. I see people coming into the room electronically, virtually. The love is starting already. This is awesome. I've had the pleasure of knowing Monique for some years now. And the way I feel called in and inspired and loved in Monique's presence, and the way that Monique just enlivens engagement with her presence is something that I'm just really excited to share with you today. And in reciprocity, how Monique signs off her bio is she asks that you send her recommendations of bookstores, restaurants, and beaches to help her find joy while surviving the end of a white supremacist, heteropatriarchal, and queerphobic world. So I invite you to focus for the next 75 minutes of learning with Monique on how to be a good neighbor. And then we'll have about 15 minutes for Q&A. So with that, thank you and welcome, Monique.
Thank you so much. I feel the applause. Thank you. Thank you. I want to extend my gratitude to the entire organization for being invited to speak this year. And I also appreciate sincerely everyone who is using their tangible resources to be present at this conference and to make time in their very, very busy days to listen to this plenary. And my hope, my intention is that we inspire some conversation, some things to think about, some things to reflect on, and that this becomes a catalyst for continuous relationship building. So thank you. And thank you, Andrelisa, for being a neighbor, being a good neighbor, and opening the door to collegiality and friendship. And I am so appreciative that you could be a part of this space today. I am putting this talk together in an effort to bring to life some of the things that I have learned, wanting to highlight the lessons that I have gained from reading, learning, and listening to so many of my ancestors and their charge, particularly ancestors who were thinking consciously about how do we create the world that we need? What do we do? What does that look like? And I think that the lessons that we gain about understanding community and neighbor being a good neighbor are particularly relevant for the work of evaluation. So my goal today is to use that wisdom of Martin Luther King and several other ancestors to think about how can we increase our capacity to use our very special role to move the world closer to the most liberated version of the world we would like to see. So that's my goal. Check me against it. Let me know if I make that accomplish that. So I want to start with a meditation offered to us by the esteemed and world-renowned poet Audre Lorde. She wrote so many amazing things, but I've been meditating on her article, Poetry is Not a Luxury, written in 1985. She starts off this article by saying, the quality of light by which we scrutinize our lives has direct bearing upon the product which we live and upon the changes which we hope to bring through those lives. Now, it is just a beautiful statement in and of itself. But when I think about it in its relationship to the work that we're doing in evaluation, we are the light. We are the light because we do the work of scrutinizing the products, the initiatives, the policies, the programs. And that light doing that work actually has a direct outcome related to what comes of it, what people decide to do, what they deem as important, what they focus on. And that then has a reflection of what changes people want to pursue in the world. We have a responsibility because we are the light. And we stress here in Audre Lorde's statement, it's not just that we are the light, but it's the quality of the light that allows this work to happen. So that means not only are we the light, just like flashlight shining on the program policy and initiative so that we can understand what's working, what's not working, what should we can move on, but the quality of the light that we shine has the bearing on what then happens in terms of social change in our world. That's a huge responsibility, a beautiful one, but a big one. And so I am offering this question of won't you be my neighbor in consideration of what is the quality of our light as evaluators? What is the quality? How are we utilizing it? I also want to bring in the esteemed ancestor Bell Hooks. She said, community is about what we bring to it, and community is based in knowing. I cannot really be in community with you, in genuine community, if I'm not willing to know you. And to know you, I may have to know things that scare me or turn me off. I bring this into the conversation. Next to being the light, we have to understand, what does it mean for us to be the light in community with other people? Because we're not evaluators in isolation. It's impossible. Evaluators cannot work without being connected to either program policy or initiative and audience interest holder beneficiary. We're connected. We hold that. So if we're in community, are we thinking about the quality of light? Are we actually understanding that we need to be cognizant of who we are and how we are to one another? Because that has a lot to do with building the quality of light that we do our work. What does it mean for us to be in community? And last but not least, bringing in Martin Luther King Jr., as he said in his sermon on being a good neighbor, the call for a good neighbor policy on the part of the nations of the world is more than ephemeral shibboleth. It's not just an idea. It is the call to a way of life which will transform our most cosmic elegy into creative fulfillment. It was the idea that if we are going to think about being a good neighbor, we are going to do the work that fulfills these ideals. Being a neighbor allows this practice of being in community, being a light, to happen. And one more quote I want to bring in as we ground this conversation. Doesn't get a crown because the good brother Ta-Nehisi Coates is around living and speaking at this very moment. But he said in his book, The Message, human dignity is in the mind and the body and not in stone. And what he is conveying here is as much as policy can be helpful as a tool to allow us to understand what it means to be in good relationships with one another, it is not the product. It is not the destination. Human dignity that we need to respect and protect for one another, the outcome that we're actually trying to protect is in the mind and in the body. And so we have to do work on our minds. We have to do work on our bodies so that what is put in stone has any meaning. So we're thinking about these things coming together to understand, what does it mean to be a good neighbor? So in essence, evaluators are responsible for protecting dignity, promoting good neighborliness, and building beloved community. Because if we don't measure it in terms of our work of evaluation, we're not accountable to it. Our work must be rooted in measuring what truly matters, not just what's easy to count. So my ask to all of you this morning is, won't you be my neighbor? Won't you be my neighbor? So we're going to get into it. Let's get into what it means to be a good neighbor. We're starting with a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King's Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community. He states, the white liberal must rid himself of the notion that there can be a tensionless transition from the old order of injustice to the new order of justice. It is important for the liberal to see that the oppressed person who agitates for his rights is not the creator of tension. He merely brings out the hidden tension that is already alive. Now, I bring this up in this moment of what it means to be a good neighbor, because this isn't all frou-frou and feel good. It's about some work that we have to be in relationship with. And here we are acknowledging, and I hope we all understand this in our role of being good quality light in evaluation, that in order to be good quality light in evaluation, we have to understand there's a tension between the world as it is in the world as it should be. And that every evaluation that we conduct can either help us get closer to the world as it should be or double down on the world as it is. Every evaluation we touch, every single one. So with that, we understand that there's a tension that exists that evaluators are signing up to be right in the middle of because of their work. We're saying a tension exists and we're going to be a light on this work. We're going to shine the light on it and we're going to engage it. We're going to engage it with some intention. We're going to engage it with some intention and think about what sort of steps we need to take to get closer to the world we deserve. What does that look like for us? What does it take from us to do that? So the question has to come here. What does it mean to no longer give consent to be evaluated through the white liberal imagination? If we're going back here and understanding the white liberal holds this notion that there's a tensionless transition, a peaceful transition from the world as it is to the world as it should be, what does it mean to say we don't consent to that? We're not going to be evaluated through that. We're going to be evaluated through the world as it should be from the world it is right now. And we're trying to work our way towards it. And I think this intention of understanding that we have the power as evaluators, and in many ways, because we're living in the communities that we work in, because we're doing work that's not isolated from the world as it is, we are also being evaluated in some other project. Right? You're the evaluator in many projects, but in other contexts, you're among the evaluated. So what does it mean to no longer give consent to be evaluated through the white liberal imagination and to hold that tension as an evaluator? Well, we'll talk about it. The first book, and I'm going to mention a lot of books, so go ahead and get your pen and get your book list ready because you'll have a lot of reading to do after this. But the first book I'll mention is Black and Blur. And this book is a part of Fred Moten. I forgot what university is at, but he's written a lot. But he has a series called Consent Not to Be a Single Being. And in it, he explores particularly the shared ethic and ethical force that moves through these three things: blur, entanglement, and fugitivity. And I'm bringing this up just to give some sense of what does it mean to no longer consent to being evaluated through the white liberal imagination. We're talking about blur in terms of the refusal of fixed categories. In the language that we're speaking right now here, in the context of what's shaping us being a part of this association, that there's so much built in to the idea of very distinct categories. Something is this and not that. And we're saying that blur is a part of that consent, as in we're not going to say these fixed categories exist. It's a more messy relationship we have with one another. In fact, we are so deeply in a messy relationship that these categories are blurred that it causes an entanglement, a healthy one, as in my liberation is tied up in yours, tied up, knotted up in yours, not something that can be separated. And he also mentions there fugitivity, the idea of escape. We're trying to escape from all these things that have allowed that question of the white liberal imagination to be placed upon us. What does it mean to get out of that? So he offers us this idea to consent not to be a single being. Again, we're talking about being a neighbor and being a community. This is a refusal of individualism because our lives are formed in relationship to others. We are neighbors. We are in community. And this isn't about saying that forsake yourself, that you're no longer an individual, but it's more of understanding a shared humanity, a liberation beyond our isolated autonomy. It's a shared mutual experience. So if we're consenting not to be a single being, we're saying as evaluators that we are consenting to understanding ourselves in community with other people at all times, never isolated. And this is a push. This is a push against the traditional forms of evaluation, the ones of which we were taught scholastically in schools, where there's some sort of objective space that an evaluator can land in. I'm saying there's a critical space that we can land in so we can offer some really important questions, but we can never devoid ourselves from being a part of humanity. And we don't want to. We don't want to. We want to be a part of humanity, to share in that collective experience so we can do the work of being in good relationship with one another. That's a goal that we have. That's what we want to work with. So ultimately, we're thinking about this in terms of dignity. And many of you have heard me talk about this before, but I want to make this connection. Consent is a model for loving connection because it helps track autonomy. This model requires consistent observation of power dynamics and astute consideration of needs and capacity, right? The opportunity that we as evaluators can give folks the opportunity to consent, we're really appreciating their ability to practice their own autonomy, right? In fact, an evaluation that's happening in community should almost have consent protocols that are more rigorous than any IRB, because our connection to community should be central to our work, even more so than the questions that we might be exploring. Understanding that consent is freely given, reversible, informed, engaged, and specific. Consent says that all parties involved are very clear on agreements. Very clear. What work do we have to do as evaluators to ensure that that's true? For our evaluation teams, for the folks that we are doing evaluation work with. And are we understanding that it takes some labor to make that true? And that we have to do some work. Consent takes time, right? Because you have to build a relationship to be in community with folks to actually gain consent. And so if we are willing to forsake the ability to get that type of consent in order to expedite the evaluation process to meet the needs of the client's budget, we are reinscribing the world as it is. So this is an invitation to us as evaluators to know that at times we have to say, hey, this is not giving enough space to do this with the diligence it needs. It's not an option. And because of that labor and because of that time, here's what the actual labor cost of this is. And I know a lot of fear keeps us from doing that, but we'll talk more about that. But a lot of fear keeps us from doing that, from pushing against those requests. But we got to acknowledge that if we're in community and we're supposed to raise the quality of the light, we have to start doing these things with deeper intention. Consent requires ease and sharing openly, assurance and interdependence, and integrity in taking. It's beyond thinking about consent as just something that's a checkbox. It's an ongoing relational dynamic. Consent is a collaboration contingent on intentionality where the answers of all bodies are required, as in every single one who was involved in this process has to give consent continually. And there's dignity in repeating the asks, right? So I know in our protocols, we might say at the beginning, do you consent? And if you don't consent, you can stop at any moment. And then we never talk about consent again. When instead, consent is an ongoing invitation in our work as evaluators that we present at the beginning, that we might present 2 minutes later, that we might present 10 minutes after that. It's an ongoing invitation that I consent to this, and it let me know if this is something that you do not consent to. I'm not assuming just because you consented where we were at the beginning that this is where we are right now. Dignity arises when consent is understood as a collective relational practice. That's how we ensure our sense of dignity. That we understand that we're all human beings that have autonomy and can make choices that relate to our own issues. So this arises when consent is understood as a collective relational practice. Dignity therefore represents the mutual acknowledgement of self-worth between an individual and society. Each person should recognize their inherent worth as is reflected in the worth of those around them. So consent, going back, is understood as a collective relational practice. Once we start centering consent, we're making it easier for us to represent that we both see each other as worthy. Which is really important for those of us who are doing evaluation work, especially program or policy evaluation work, public health evaluation work, that's often dealing with interventions of those who have been marginalized or harmed by systems. where there's already inherently built up in the societal arrangement that there's some less worthiness because this intervention, this program, this policy exists. So there's some work that the evaluator has to do to say, hey, how can I represent in this engagement that you and I are both members of a community that are curious about this? How can we do that together? How can I provide consent that allows that dignity to be affirmed for you? How can I do that? How am I doing the work and or labor to be present there? I want to start with some words from Maya Angelou. Hopefully this works, bro.
If I think of my life as a class and what I've really learned, I've learned a few things. First, I'm aware that I'm a child of God. It's such an amazing understanding to think that the it, which made fleas and mountains, and rivers and stars, made me. What I pray for is humility, to know that there's something greater than I. Then I have to know that the brute, the bigot, and the batterer are all children of God, whether they know it or not. And I'm supposed to treat them accordingly. And it's hard, and I blow it all the time. I'd like everybody to think of a statement by Terence. The statement is, I am a human being. Nothing human can be alien to me. If you can internalize the least portion of that, you will never be able to say of an act, a criminal act, or I couldn't do that. No matter how heinous the crime, if a human being did it, you have to say, I have in me all the components that are in her or in him. I intend to use my energies constructively as opposed to destructively. If you can do that about the negative, just think what you can do about the positive. If a human being dreams a great dream, dares to love somebody, if a human being dares to be Martin King or Mahatma Gandhi or Mother Teresa or Malcolm X, if a human being dares to be bigger than the condition into which she or he was born, it means so can you. And so you can try to stretch, stretch yourself. So you can internalize, ah, homo sum, humani nihila me alienum puto. I am a human being. Nothing human can be alien to me. That's one thing I'm learning.
So thankful for that reflection. And I carry that when we're talking about dignity and doing this consent work, right? That we're all human doing a human thing on this plane, right? And what does it mean for us to carry the practice, the idea that because I'm a human being, nothing a human can do is alien to me? It's not strange to me. It's right here. And I'm not saying that just because you do it, I've done it. I'm saying that you have the capacity to do it. I'm a human being. I also have the capacity to do that for better and for worse. So, what kind of understanding do we now participate with one another if that is our truth, right? If that is our truth, the worst of me exists in you, and the worst of you exists in me. How can we now relate to each other, right? It's so interesting when I come across evaluations, particularly those that are related to interventions, because of class distinction, right? We know that interventions exist in health and education, all of this because of this idea of class, what people have access to, can afford, what that looks like. All of that is a large part of a lot of the work that evaluators are doing. But we also know that all of us in this room are much closer to needing the program than to becoming the richest person in the world. We're so much closer. But because of how our society works, we're spending way more time creating distinctions between us and them than to think about the connections of the fact that the possibility exists for all of us in this room, because I'm arguing that there aren't the top 100 richest people in the world in this room with us doing evaluation work. But it's saying that all of us are much closer to needing some of these interventions than we are becoming the richest person in the world. So how come we spend more energy making a distinction between us and them, as opposed to understanding the connections between us and them? How could that possibly enliven, invigorate our evaluation work? Thinking about the question, the title of this, won't you be my neighbor? What does it mean for you to hold that question in terms of every evaluation that you do coming from the communities that are the participants, subjects, ideators, beneficiaries of your evaluation? What does it mean for you to focus on becoming neighborly? So we think about this in terms of some measurable things that we can observe, because I'm talking to evaluators. I know how we think. So we're thinking about the dignity of aliveness, the inherent worth and vibrant existence of human life beyond the constraints of social political violence, right? Beyond the constraints of social political violence, which includes the idea of thinking of, there's a Dr. Monique Liston that exists outside and beyond Black and woman and American and English speaker and college educated, and that there's a worthiness inside there. And what does it mean for us to consent to connect in that regard so that we can do this work together? At the top, the first thing is that dignity of autonomy, which we've already identified. How can we protect the dignity of autonomy? Holding consent right at the center. Consent allows me to practice that dignity of autonomy, allows you to practice the dignity of autonomy, offering consent as an invitation as opposed to an interrogation, right? What do you consent to when you're working? How do you encourage others to consent to being a part of this work? We're thinking about the dignity of humanity, which is what was referred to in the video, the inherent worth, just because we are human beings. We are human beings. One of the things that's important to think about, so all of my research in finishing my doctoral studies almost a decade ago, old person, was surrounded around the idea of dignity. And one of the oldest known written documents of dignity comes from the teachings of Ptah Hotep, which is often accepted as one of the oldest written books in the world. In this book, there's a story about a pharaoh wanting to be entertained. Wanting to be entertained. So he calls for the magicians of the area to come do some tricks for him. He summons them, they do tricks, and he tells one of them, I heard that you can cut off the head of a human being and put it back on and bring them back to life. I want to see that trick. So he calls that magician into the Pharaoh's palace and brings them there and said, I heard you can do this, and demands that he do it. He brings a prisoner, someone who is enslaved within the Pharaoh's palace, brings them here and says, magician, go. Make this happen. Kill this person and bring them back to life. And that magician says, I cannot do that. For me to take away this person's life would to go against their humanity. And to do so is something that's against the principles that I hold. I won't do this. This person's in captivity. They can't consent to this. You are trying to ask me to do this purely for your entertainment. That story is the oldest idea of someone protecting someone's sense of dignity. I appreciate the ancientness of that story, particularly because it's connected to the carceral system as well. What does it mean to say there's refusal? Come on, going back to consent to not be a single being, refusal to take part in this classist system, i.e., Pharaoh making a demand and me responding to it just because he can pay. Because I've consented to not be a single being. There's a humanity in this brother. I cannot kill him just for your entertainment. That's the work we're trying to talk about. Can you be the magician in the Pharaoh's palace in your evaluation work? The dignity of humanity. And then the dignity of mutual rank. The conscious uncoupling of dignity from status or position to mutual position from all of us. The idea is I'm not better than you. You're not better than me. No one's better than us. We're all doing this human thing together. Now, there might be material conditions that have made our experience on this earth different from one another, but that does not make anyone better or more human than me. And there's nothing that I've done, participated in, contributed to that makes me more human than you. And there's no way whatever bad thing that I've ever dreamt up or done on this earth makes me less human. I won't allow that to be taken away from anybody. So we dig deeper into how we can be accountable to the fact that this dignity of aliveness can exist, right? So we did this sort of questioning of us, interrogating how we're showing up as evaluators and doing our evaluation work. But now let's think about the accountability to the policy programs, interventions, all the work that we're doing and how it shows up there. The dignity of accountability includes merit, recognizing and honoring individuals, including yourself, based on skills, abilities, and contributions. Are people being recognized for what they're able to bring to a space? Okay. Remember the quality of our light. Can we amplify it to make sure we can see everyone's contributions? Are we ready or prepared to acknowledge the value of some of these contributions? A couple years ago, I was a professor in some would call this rural college campus. As you can imagine, there were not a lot of Black faces on campus, particularly holding the title of professor or teaching. And when I was also young, so I'm a young Black woman, and I think gender had a lot to do with it as well, teaching in a women's studies department. And a fantastic time, fantastic students. And when I would go to my office, because there was an office with my name on the door, there was always 3 to 4 students outside my door, ready to talk. Now, I was an adjunct. I didn't even teach that many classes. And often or not, maybe the students who were at my door, maybe 50% of them were students who were actually in my class. The rest of them were a student was in my class and said, "Hey, do you know, have you ever met, have you ever been to, let me go bring you over there so you can come talk to her." The number of stories I heard about in terms of racist, sexist, homophobic incidents happening across campus because students didn't feel safe and they said, "Here's somebody I can talk to," and they would come and talk to me and it was wonderful. I'm glad I had that relationship, but it was also exhausting. So a lot of stories to hold for a lot of young people. And let me remind you all, I was an adjunct. So this was not counting for anything. This was not counting for anything. It wasn't service to the university. It was merely me being a good neighbor. Now, what was a beautiful thing is that the chair of my department decided to raise the quality of her light. And she realized that I was putting in way more work than my contract required of me because I was on campus. My mere presence was allowing people to seek refuge and then talk to me. And then I was holding and talking back to them. I'm doing a whole nother advisory job that is not a part of my contract. The supervisor at that time gave me, I mean, I would have appreciated, more money. That would have been the first appreciation. But she offered, considering the way this was happening for me, that I switched my class to hybrid, because she realized the more you come to campus, the more students are going to seek you out. This is not what we have hired you to do. Here is a protection, because I'm understanding that your skills, abilities, and contributions are superseding what we're actually compensating you for. So here's an opportunity for me to recognize that and provide an intervention. Now, on the system level, that was beneficial to me. On the systemic level, right, this makes it more difficult for students because now they have less access to something that they actually needed, right? But thinking about raising the quality of our light as an evaluator, thinking about some sort of questions that come in terms of programming that understands what people bring to positions and what the actual role brings to program. What does that look like in our evaluation? Are we sensitive to and holding on to the quality of our light to recognize the merit, the dignity of merit for what some people are doing? It's not so much their role as in the fact that they have this title. It's because they, as a person, are bringing something to it that's enhancing the quality of this program, enhancing the quality of this for participants. So thinking about, we can actually measure and observe the dignity of merit. We can think about the dignity of excellence, to believe in every human's boundless potential, including our own. I can't even count how many times people have made it clear that they do not believe everyone who's participating in their program or needs their intervention is capable of being excellent. They'll say it like, yeah, I believe in everybody, but then their actions will show the complete opposite. And so we have to be sensitive. The quality of our light has to show on, like, does everyone actually believe in everyone's excellence here, including their own? Where is that not showing up? Where are people not protecting that? Where is that not affirmed? The dignity of identity, to see people, including yourself, for who they are as they are, and to recognize and appreciate all aspects of a person's identity. Understanding the significance of that work and being transparent about the impact and the representation of that work. I know and appreciate what has come up for being able to understand the impact of racialized identity and how racialized identities are assumed in some ways to be incompetent because of their racialized identity, or presumed competence because of their racialized identity, neither of which actually demonstrating their competence towards a thing. What does it mean for us to recognize when that stuff creeps up in our work? Are we raising the quality of our light to be able to scrutinize? Are we actually seeing people for who they are as they are and recognizing and appreciating all aspects of their identity? The presumption in our work, come on, evaluators, let's talk about it. The presumption in our work of how women get to approach evaluation and the things that are asked of them in the evaluative process, because they're evaluators, that are not asked of male counterparts. Simply not asked to hold the traumatic stories of hundreds of people. Simply not asked or presumed that the emotional resonance just comes with the job. The permission, thinking about our commissioners of evaluation, the permission granted because of the gender dynamics of the evaluation team to use a particular data collection strategy versus another. It's less about appropriateness of the question in the program at hand and more about the team being able to validate, I can distance myself from this and that's okay. So we can use a less connective, less relational data collection process, or presuming, because this is an all woman evaluation team, that this is going to be relational and they should take on that labor without thinking of any additional emotional or financial costs. The dignity of identity. The dignity of relationships, to live within the community without being isolated against one's will, and to safeguard the relationships of every individual, including yourself. I said this, and I will say this, and I will continue to preach this in our work, that if all our relationship building is really for the sake of getting a data point, that relationship building is coercive and manipulative. We need to think about our relationships with a little bit more integrity. I'm not saying that we have to be best friends with every single individual human that we engage through the evaluation process. But let's talk about deepening what consent is and making sure that's a part of the process. And that this relationship isn't merely used just to get the good, juicy bits of data out of them. Because that is coercive and manipulative and is the opposite of the more participatory, consent-based, liberating work we're trying to do. How do we create those relationships and making sure people have access to those relationships so that our engagement is authentic, genuine, meaningful, and not coercive and manipulative? How can we ensure that? What does that look like for you in these projects? Access to have equitable opportunities, resources, services, and opportunities and spaces essential for well-being, growth, and participation. I think this is a good question to hold in our evaluations because a lot of time people overlook the access limitations that already exist and how that's perpetuating or reproducing the society and the social oppression that we're trying to address. How ableist are a lot of our evaluation activities? And are we thinking about making some more room for those to change? Belonging, to be a part of social circles, institutions, or societies without fear of exclusion or discrimination. The favorite thing of those empowered to do is to grant people access to spaces, but let them know they don't belong. Get folks right into the table, like, yeah, you can come in, you can join, you can apply, you can be there. But as soon as they get there, cold shoulder. As soon as they get there, oh, I don't know who you are or why you're here. Or as soon as they get there, no invitation to participate, to laugh, to engage, to be beyond the member. Belonging is a part of understanding this dignity component. And then last but not least, honesty, to build a foundation for trust, accountability, and ethical behavior in personal, professional, and societal contexts. Again, these aren't mutually exclusive. In order for us to give the dignity of excellence and identity, we have to be honest. In order for people to understand the access, we have to know that they belong. In order for any of these things to make sense, we have to have the relationships. These are not mutually exclusive. They're happening together so that we can give each other the dignity of accountability. An affirmation of the fact that we're all human beings who are autonomous and are giving consent to be in this engagement together. This right here is saying, in a neighborly way, I am respecting, protecting, and fulfilling this for folks. The relationships that we build must be built on consent, and the most radical relationships means we consent not to be a single being. We consent to be in community. We consent to our neighborliness. So if that's what we must do in our work, right, in our evaluations, what do we need to be doing with each other as evaluators? What do we need to be doing to be in good community and to support each other in growing one another's light? If evaluators are serious about measuring dignity as a pathway to the world we want, they must also consent to community as a daily practice. A daily practice, one rooted in relationship, accountability, and shared purpose. Practice becomes really important because practice allows us to improvise when we get into situations that may cause panic. If we haven't been practicing how to be in good relationships with one another, when, I don't know, a federal administration deems all of your work as ineffective and unimportant, and you don't understand how to do your work or the context or container in which your work evolves, if you haven't been practicing community, it's really hard for you to stay connected. We practice so when the hard things come up, we're ready to improvise. So we have to practice as evaluators being in community with one another. How do we do that? Now, I already said that honesty was a part of dignity, but let's talk about what radical honesty is. Agent Marie Brown talks about radical honesty in her book, Emergent Strategy. She says, radical honesty, no omissions, no white lies, no projections. Ask the questions you really want answered, speak your truth, and let the relationship build inside of all that reality. Just a note from experience, the small lies can be the hardest to stop telling. No, I don't want to get on the phone right now. Can we just text? I'm busy catching up on my reality TV show. real cow milk ice cream. Shout out to all the lactose intolerant folks in the room. I know I said I didn't want to, but now I do. However, the more you practice this, the more you find yourself spending your waking hours in the ways you want to, the ways that honor the miracle of your existence, which was not given to you to waste in polite avoidance of hurting people's feelings. You will find that you can be honest and kind. You can be honest and compassionate. People don't tell each other the truth. We don't tell each other the truth. And that is part of the reason we do not have the containers that help us build to being in the right kind of community to get us towards liberation, because we're building it on little lies. Little lies. And what does it mean for us to start practicing this honesty with one another? What are we trying to protect ourselves from? What are we afraid of if we actually speak our truth? That we are seen, that we are heard, that we are perhaps not superheroes, that we're nothing but human beings trying to figure out how to do humanness one day at a time. And I'm saying this because I know that there's some connection here, right, between what it means as I grew up in the Midwestern United States and what it means to identify as Canadian. Both of us are known as forsaking the truth and able to be polite. How do we undo some of that work? Because that container already exists. The container for which our politeness forsakes our truth already exists, and it has not gotten us closer to the world we want. So we got to try something else. We got to do something different. We got to be more honest. It also requires radical vulnerability. An essential requirement for journeying together as co-authors in a political landscape disfigured by nonstop epistemic violence. I want to stop there for just a second because, hello, this is what evaluation is. Journeying together as co-authors in a political landscape disfigured by nonstop epistemic violence. It's literally, that's our work. That's our work. This co-authorship hinges on sharing authority through a situated solidarity that derives its meanings from groundedness in place, time, and struggle, and that continuously strives for radical love through the disillusion of egos. We have to make ourselves vulnerable to what we know and to what we don't know, and make sure that it's clear that we're willing to learn. Yesterday, I was time travel is a real thing in case you were wondering, but yesterday I was in Michigan and I was doing a pre-conference workshop for the Michigan Association of Evaluators. And I was talking about storytelling and really radical ways in which we can ensure storytelling helps us do this work. And someone came up to me afterwards and asked, how do I continue to deepen my practice? Like I'm there, they identified as a white woman and made that clear that was relevant to their question. How do I continue deepening my practice without asking people to teach me all the time? And I told her, the most important thing you can do is to be honest and vulnerable about what you have learned and what you still need to learn. Part of our politeness is making this assumption that however we show up and have been this person our entire lives, that we did no work to become the human being that you see before us today. Even though all of us knows whatever brilliance comes out of our mouth comes from a lot of affirmation and a lot of struggle. The more that we are honest about how we have struggled to come to know, learn, and understand a thing, the better we'll be at being able to be invited to learn more. Here's where I'm really excelling. I've really learned a lot about this, dug in, and here's where I feel like I have some gaps. Because of course we don't know what we don't know, but if I'm not making a constant invitation, a constant ability to consent to learning more, how will people take that on without seeing it as labor to push you towards a thing? You got to consent to the fact, I need to learn some more. And I need to make myself vulnerable to the fact that there's learning I still need to do in public places. Vulnerable to the fact that I had to go through some things to know what I know now. And I got to go through some more to know what I don't know. And a lot of times when we're going all the way back to the beginning, we're talking about the white liberal imagination. The white liberal imagination thinks I don't have to be honest or vulnerable to get us to the next level. Everybody else does. Everybody else needs to do that. And the more they do that, the better we'll be. But really, For combating the white liberal imagination, we're understanding that white liberal imagination holders need to do this work, right? Again, what does it mean for us to start being in community with one another? So thinking about this practice, we already know what we're measuring as folks doing evaluation work, but what does it mean for us to be in community as evaluators? How do we hold radical openness? How are we open to new ideas, concepts, and practices with one another? How are we displaying that? Are we ready to answer this question? Where are you closed? Where have you said, nah, no, don't talk to me or ask me about this? How's that impacting the work? I share this quote, and all of these quotes that you'll see come from Dr. Martin Luther King's sermon on being a good neighbor. He says in the year 1962, the relevance of this today is like, whew, mind-blowing. But he says, philanthropy is marvelous. But what it must not cause a philanthropist to overlook is the need for working to remove many conditions of economic injustice which make philanthropy necessary. I say that in the context of radical openness, because are we not open to the idea that some of the work that we do shouldn't even exist in the first place? Are we open to that idea? And that openness helps us to ground our questions in the world we're trying to make come into fruition, and not just the world as it is. We're trying to evaluate towards that future. So we need to be open to some of the things that allow us to know that we have bigger questions than just did we get it done? Should this even be a task that's being done? And what are the conditions that allow this task to exist? Maybe our question needs to be up there and not just down here. We have to struggle with our fears. I already talked about the fears that come with not wanting to be honest or vulnerable. When do we learn to embrace our fears for our comfort? We learn to embrace our fears for our comfort. So it's like, I'm going to hold on to this fear of the other, the different, the unexplored, something I haven't done yet, because it's more comfortable to embrace that than to become honest and vulnerable to something I'm unfamiliar with. And if we're not going to commit to struggling with our fears or what we're scared of, we're not going to be in a space of working towards the world we actually need. And sometimes the things that we're scared of is not being as smart as we thought we were. Sometimes what we're afraid of is not being as ready for the new world as we thought we were. Sometimes we're just afraid of things being different. I put this dog here because in this article about beloved community, Bell Hooks speaks to the fact that she has a fear of dogs. And she said, people say that I don't like dogs. And I'm like, that's not true. I don't have any problem with dogs. I just have an irrational fear of them and I'm working on it. And I think that honesty and vulnerability is important to separate from how it is leveraged against things. I'm afraid of that. And are we getting to the root of the fear? Often people are not actually afraid of individuals. They're afraid that the confrontation of that individual would reveal about themselves. And so being a part of that is, how do we struggle? And how do we in community with one another help each other struggle with some of that fear? People fail to get along with each other because they fear each other. They fear each other because they don't know each other. They don't know each other because they have not properly communicated with each other. Consent to not be a single being. If I'm consenting that I'm in community with you, what kind of engagements do I need to start building with my evaluation community? What kind of awareness, what kind of presence can I be practicing to be more available and helping other people to no longer fear something they don't know? What does that look like on a small scale? The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and in moments of convenience, but where he stands in moments of challenge and in moments of controversy. The true neighbor is the man who will risk his position, his prestige, and even his life for the welfare of others. His altruism will not be limited to safety places, but it will move through dangerous valleys and hazardous pathways to lift some bruised and beaten brother to a higher and more noble life. we're here thinking about this. And an interesting note about Dr. Martin Luther King's On Being a Good Neighbor speech. So there are excerpts that have been recorded of this sermon. However, full text versions of it come from his notes. And so from his notes, they're not actually what he ends up saying in the sermon. And in his notes, of course, are misspellings and scratched out words. So what you're seeing here is the text from his notes getting as aligned as close to the sermon that he delivered. So you're like, some of these words, yeah, because these were his notes, right? And that's the text of which we put together what this sermon is. But thinking about struggling with fear and thinking about, where we can each stand in moments of comfort and moments of convenience and moments of challenge and moments of controversy, and the role in which we as a community of evaluators need to stand in. Thinking about some of the sessions that were held over this week in which people are letting folks know that there's been moments of challenge, of controversy, and here's where they stood within them. And whether people knew it or not, they also been sharing moments of comfort and convenience that they chose them as well. And I think as we're enhancing our collective light, our individual through collective light, that we can actually begin to distill the difference between the two and then become a better neighbor by being able to, one, name these things as they are problems in some regards. And if we can name them, as Kimberly Crenshaw reminds us, then we can actually work to solve them. So if part of our problem is that in some of our evaluation efforts, when critical issues come up, people—
It's 11 o'clock.
Sorry, my computer. People stand in comfort and convenience. If that's what happens, we need to start building a practice around standing in challenge and controversy. What does that look like for us? And what does that feel like for us? So that when the moment comes, we're not like, panicking. How do I do this? No, we need to be in a routine, a practice, a visibility of what this looks like. Seeing redeeming qualities, making sure that you can see redeeming qualities. I put a picture of a car here because one of my good friends, every time I bring up redeeming qualities and being in community with one another, she says the invitation is to think about a person that you can't stand. Person who just irks you to your core, annoys you for whatever reason. And it's okay. We're all human beings. Somebody on this planet makes us feel that way. And think about being in a road trip with them for 10 or more hours. You and them in the car. Seeing redeeming qualities is surviving that road trip. Surviving that road trip. And that allows us to think there's got to be something there. And even the something might be they can drive. Well, let that be the something that you build off of, right? We have to start seeing redeeming qualities in folks no matter what if we're trying to build community through this work with one another, right? What's the redeeming aspect of this? Because what we don't get a whole lot from canceling folks or just divorcing our relationships with them or just ignoring the possibilities of ever engaging them. That doesn't really help us build towards the world we want to see. We have to understand there's some redeeming qualities, and the redeeming qualities need to be utilized. Now, because I'm operating in community and I've consented not to be a single being, that may also mean I'm not the one who has to spend time in helping them build their practice. I'm in community. So I'm in community with someone else who does that work with them. Okay. There's redeeming qualities because I understand the value of that, but that's not to say that I am therefore responsible with doing that with everyone. Be in community. We've consented not to be a single being. The good neighbor will look beyond the external accidents long enough to see those inner qualities that make all men human and therefore brothers. You see the misspelling there from his text. So thinking about things that have happened, again, we've also acknowledged we're all human beings and anything another human being does is not foreign to us because the capacity of another human being doing that also means that's in me. And that might be the wake-up call that you too can be annoying. You too. Somebody, when I made that offer of thinking about the person you can't stand and being the road trip, somebody's thinking about you. That's what we've consented to understanding. Like, well, dang, well, if I'm in the, how would I? Yes, that's what we're thinking about. We're thinking about the possibility that while you're thinking of someone else, someone is thinking of you, and how would you want to be treated because you're that person in someone else's car. So hold that, holding that. Whew. Love. Let's hear what James Baldwin says.
There may not be, as much humanity in the world as one would like to see.
There is some. There's more than one would think. In any case, if you break faith with what you know, it's a betrayal of many, 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 many people. I may know 6 people, but that's enough. Love has never been a popular movement. And no one's ever wanted really to be free. The world is held together, really is held together. The love and passion of very few people. Otherwise, of course, you can despair. Walk down the street of any city, any afternoon, and look around you. But you got to remember that what you're looking at is also you. Everyone you're looking at is also you. You could be that person. You could be that monster. You could be that cop. And you're to decide in yourself not to be.
So thinking about the idea of loving beyond your own experience and holding that as important in our relationships as we build with one another, that we are doing different kinds of work in different kind of communities in different kinds of scenarios, but we've already identified that we're sharing a human experience. So what does it mean for us to understand that it isn't just a few people's responsibility to be the light? It's all of ours. It's all of ours. And how do we build our capacity to be as conscious of it as it relates to this work, right? So Dr. King, he said, love is creative and redemptive. Physical force can repress, restrain, coerce, destroy, but it cannot create and organize anything permanent. Only love can do that. Yes, love, which means understanding, creative, redemptive goodwill, even for one's enemies. It is the solution to the race problem. It's important, right, to think about Dr. King's context in all of this work as we're thinking about how lovely it is that in Canada, that's the beginning of the second decade for people of African descent. And what does it mean for us to understand the contextualization and the lessons of addressing a race problem that is centuries old, but have not been fully realized in our field? What can we do? What can we do as the folks who are sort of right at the intersection of the folks most impacted by the problem and the folks who have the power to achieve the problem? How do we actually address that in our role? How can we raise the quality of our light to scrutinize things towards the world we want to see? How do we do that? How do we raise that vibration together? Embracing conflict. Thinking about conflict as generative and not something that is to be feared or avoided. Going back to our shared Canadian and Midwest niceness. We need to push against that and embrace conflict. And remember, this is a practice. And if we don't practice dealing with conflict, when the really big things happen, we're going to dig into the harmful routine of avoidance. We need to embrace conflict in the very small little ways. Like, I don't like pepperoni pizza. I don't understand why you keep getting it and bringing it to me. Like having that conversation. And it goes back, a lot of this conflict that folks are having comes for two things, as I understand it. One, people weren't honest, and two, they didn't set any boundaries. You weren't honest in the beginning. So now you're in a position of like, you don't like what's going on, but this only persisted because you were never honest in the first place. And then you initiated a communication opportunity, a willing to be in relationship with folks based upon going against your own boundaries, and now you're upset about that, but it's happening and now you're being harmed by it. But this is really because you should have held your boundaries in the first place. What does it mean for us to see all of these generative opportunities, not just like, hey, there's some mutual solution that we can come to? Sometimes I'm embracing the conflict because the aha moment is I'm the problem. I'm embracing this conflict, and the realization is like, girl, you the problem. You didn't tell the truth. That's what it is. Next time, be more honest. You're the problem. You didn't hold your boundaries. Next time, figure out what tools and strategies you need to be in community and to keep your boundaries. What does that look like for us in our work? I cannot conceive of a period of social transition without some tension. This is an inevitable. Whenever you are moving from an old order to a new order, in the transition period, there's some tension. Tension isn't the permanent condition of things. Tension is a necessary phase of transition. Going back, and this is Dr. King echoing himself, what he already said, the white liberal imagination is trying to avoid this tension, trying to say that it's a tensionless process. And we're making it very clear that there is tension and that we get to embrace it. And that's actually our job as the evaluator, to shine some light on those tensions and provide data and information that will help people understand how they can help be on the other side of this tension. This tension being that we're not in the right relationship we should be as all humans sharing a human experience, because we've allowed certain things like money, war, physical aggression, gender, sexuality, religion, race to get in between our humanness. Those are the tensions. No matter what we're evaluating, these tensions are present. How we were thinking about those tensions being the context, the container for a lot of our evaluation work, and helping people see with more light how they can get on the other side of it. Forgiveness. Forgiveness. And this is less about like the spiritual sense of forgiveness. Everybody can have their own spiritual practice, but this is all about the letting go, the grudge holding, the resistance to seeing redeeming qualities, the resistance of being back in community, the resistance of continuing honesty. You're holding on to things. And a lot of times that forgiveness that we need to practice is about ourselves. We haven't forgiven ourselves for stuff. We're holding on to stuff. So it really makes it hard for us to let go of other people's stuff. When all this stuff that we're holding is getting in the way of us towards of the liberation we want. We can't get to the liberation we want because we're carrying all this stuff that we need to let go. We need to let go. And sometimes some of the stuff we need to let go is just that theory, that framework, that thing I've worked really hard on in my work that was like the crux of how I believed I should be doing my evaluation work, no longer cuts it. And instead of trying to make it continue to fit, understand you now have a new understanding of the world. Forgive yourself for not knowing better before and be open to knowing better now. Be vulnerable enough to share with people that that's been your truth, and honest enough to say, I've had to come to learn this, right? That's what we have to do in our community with each other. Forgiveness is not a permanent act, it's a permanent attitude, a willingness to let go, right? And this isn't to be haphazard and put yourself in harm's way with other folks, but to understand harm will happen. How do I understand and build a practice around resolving and dealing with harm in community? How do I do that in my evaluation work? At Ubuntu Research and Evaluation, every client we engage with, we start with one of our truths. And one of our truths is harm will happen. We are a Black organization full of marginalized genders with queer identities. The container in which the world is built upon right now, how our social relations are built, are queer-phobic, anti-woman, anti-trans, anti-Black. So of course some harm is going to happen through this work. The world is built to harm me right now. I'm acknowledging that, but I'm actually creating a practice of understanding how I deal with it. I'm asking you to create a practice of how you deal from committing those kind of harms, right? What does that look like? And so all of us being in that, just as we have the capacity to be harmed, we have the capacity to harm. So that means we think about that in terms of our work as well. Moving towards liberation, thinking about how can we get freer? How can we work together in our evaluation work to get freer? What can we do? How can we work with each other? How can we deepen our work? And are we clear? Can we be honest enough how often we seek the comfort of our own oppression? We seek that comfort. How do we build up to resist that? Isn't this why it is a national crime to murder a citizen of your own nation, but an act of heroic virtue to murder the citizens of another nation in war? Now, I could probably write a whole nother talk just about this particular quote and the reference and aligning with what he was saying in terms of Vietnam War at the time, the context of which he is shaping this. But thinking about how that gets down into some of the things that have been true in our local municipalities in terms of people seeing themselves at war with sections of the town, sections of the city, certain people in the communities in which we live. Whether that's being at war with the homeless, being at war with mothers with young children, being at war with one side of the city, a group of folks who share a cultural identity, a group who share a religious identity, thinking about the ways in which we protect our own, but then see heroic virtue in harming others. Moving towards liberation is like, how do we make this question not a thing? Not a thing. Seeking reconciliation, going back to embracing conflict, one of the pathways of seeking reconciliation is understanding I can create harm and be harmed. So me, yeah, you have to make sure that we're in the work of seeking reconciliation with other folks. To do the work within our evaluation field of thinking about how can we reconcile difference? What does it take from us? What do I need to contribute? What does that look like? And again, Dr. King, there's another element that must be present in our struggle that makes our resistance and nonviolence truly meaningful. That element is reconciliation. So he brought all of these things in as practices of being the good neighbor. I say all of this. Evaluators are truly committed to building a world rooted in dignity, then they must surrender the comfort of distance and step fully into the sacred, complicated work of community. This is not a task of metrics, it's a matter of heart and of will and of soul, and it requires radical honesty about the ways evaluation has been used to surveil rather than support, to extract rather than empower. It calls us to embrace conflict not as a threat, but as an invitation to deeper relationship, and to be brave enough in our work to stay when things get hard, to listen when it's uncomfortable, and to measure what truly matters: trust, healing, and belonging towards the world we want to see. To measure dignity is to be changed by the people you measure it with. It is to put your body, your values, your practice on the line for something more human, more just, and more alive. This isn't just work. Doing this evaluation, it's not just a task, it's a reckoning. We are in the world to help establish a reckoning with the world as it is towards the world as it should be. So my ask to all of you is, won't you be my neighbor in this? Share in the accountability, share in the joy, share in the challenge, share in the struggle of us evaluating towards the world we deserve. Let's build that community. Let's build that accountability. Let's build towards that world. And I'll close out with reminding us that this might seem big. But what we practice at the small scale sets the patterns for the whole system. So we can do this in our small daily interactions with one another. Be neighborly when it comes to your evaluation teams. Be neighborly when it comes to responding to those emails, and think about how that practice can set a new practice for how we work with one another. Thank you all so much, and I'm ready to engage in a conversation.
Thank you. I'm gonna read two like super juicy questions. Number one, what should we do as an evaluation community to make sure embracing conflict is safe for women and other population groups who often face negative repercussions in the workplace for being assertive, challenging the status quo, etc. And number two, how can we evaluators engage in an evaluation rooted in true consent when evaluating based on a legal requirement? Sometimes in federal government, we must evaluate regardless of whether the evaluand wants to participate.
Big, juicy questions. Yes. And I appreciate any other thoughts and responses to this to be dropped in the chat too, so we can engage in some dialogue. And hi, friends. I know there's some friends in the room, familiar faces. So This is my wave, and big heart and love for y'all being here. Um, what I think is important for all of us in terms of the power wielding that we do hold, right? So if we have marginalized identities, particularly if we're in this room, there's also some identities of power that we also hold, right? So I'm coming to the space identifying as Black, as queer, as woman, but I also come into the space as someone who holds a PhD, who in some worlds can identify as an American, and that's a good thing. In other rooms, that's a bad thing. But holding all of that is understanding in terms of that question about conflict, that there's some spaces where I need to help others be in the position to bring their conflicts to the front. And that modeling will help other people to understand when they need to do the same for you. Right. And so I think a lot of times we get trapped in being the only one, the only lonely. Shout out to Dr. Hazel Simonette. Fun fact, Dr. Hazel Simonette's giving the keynote in Michigan right this second. So I wanted to give her a shout out, send some energy her way. But if we're so used to being the one and only, the only lonely in spaces in which we're always fighting against the powers that be, we need to ask ourselves, is this the best space for me to be in? Is it? And if it is, how can I get some more folks to be in this space with me who share or can also support me in this? And I say that intentionally because sometimes we're fighting battles for no reason. Like we're in rooms that it's like, this is not the room to change. Like this is just a waste of energy and time. And I'm upset and weary and grieving every single day because I'm in the wrong space. And so I think about when we're addressing this conflict and trying to make safety, we need to understand that we have some responsibility to some regard in making it safer for others. Anyone who's in this room as identifying as adult, you have some responsibility for young people. Always. How do they feel safer around you and other folks? If you identify as a man, you have a responsibility in creating a more dignified world to make sure non-men, folks with marginalized gendered identities, including women, feel safe, not just around you, but any of the spaces you inhabit. I, as a person holding all these stupid letters behind my name, have a responsibility to make sure that people who enter a room who don't have these letters behind their name feel that they are just as worthy to share, do, and be in those spaces as me. So it's sharing that responsibility. It makes it a little easier for folks to feel through that because we know we have some responsibility to it, and thinking about our ability to increase that light. The last thing I'll say is when we're struggling with fear and we're doing this, and it's like, we face retribution every time we're assertive, it's thinking about, am I building the community around me that might not be in this room, but can still support me, that allows me to continue to show up, right? I'm able to show up every day because I do not work in a vacuum as an evaluator. I have this entire wonderful team at Ubuntu Research and Evaluation. If I didn't have this team, I wouldn't be able to do half the things that I do. So thinking about where are the communities that you are building, I call them political homes. Communities of practice is also a thing that can hold you as you start going into those spaces and pushing that assertiveness. So can someone else be there for you? Is this the right space for you? And are you building the community beyond this that can support you as you do this work? That's question one. Question two. We're talking about consent based on a legal requirement, right? So my first thing is some organizing needs to happen amongst evaluators to figure out how consent can be deepened so this practice doesn't continue. So that's first, and that's not quick work, that's not slow work, but that's intentional work. And I think that when we face political questions like that, it's like, how do we organize? That's what we're here for. That's what these organizations bring us together for, to start, how can we organize to be in service to the work that we do? This is something that you're bringing to the table that should be addressed. That's one. Two is thinking about, in what small ways can I add more consent, right? So I know I have to do this to get this done. What can I do in a smaller interaction that allows consent to exist? Now, this might still push me to do X, Y, and Z, but am I allowing consent to exist in a smaller way? Am I providing more invitations to participate in smaller ways that allow that to be present, which I think is really important. Overall in our work, we have to be building new practices while destroying the old ones. So we have to be increasing the ways we're giving consent under whatever charge we're given, while also thinking about how do we undo how harmful it is to have a legal requirement to conduct this sort of evaluation activity that does not allow the participants to give consent. Takes us back to that prisoner and the magician, right? How do we organize towards that? Which, thank you for lifting that up. I hope someone in this room of people thinks about how can we collaborate and collectively organize around that. I do not believe it's impossible to do this work just because of the relationship with the federal government. What I do believe is that what it means to be practicing honesty, to be speaking the truth, has to be done strategically and with care. In my experience, I have had good relationships with folks who are in this position when they create the opportunity for their consultants to do what they can't do through their role. They make way and they make space and make that intention so the things that need to get said can be said by the people who should be saying them. And so I think that's where community makes a lot of importance and what solidarity actually means for us, right? It's not for us to all be on the same journey addressing the same problem at the same time. It's for us to understand what work people are dedicated to and how they can complement us all getting our needs met. So I think that when you're in those federal roles, it's like, who can I build a community with that's beyond just the definition of the scope of this project in my role, that allow the right questions to be asked, that the right people hear the right things, and the right practices are upheld. And I'm not saying that it's smooth sailing. I'm just saying that that is a principled struggle to be in if you're going to be in the role of a federal government employee doing this work, to not abandon it, right? Think about what sort of solidarity can be formed with folks who are consultants, with folks who are working in community, how you can co-create space, how can you honestly be subversive to get these ideas to the forefront, because you become the tool that gets to be leveraged, which is a beautiful role to be in when other folks know that you're in a place to allow the right thing to be said at the right time by someone who isn't them. So think of it more as opportunity to understand what other folks who are running organizations outside the government need you to be doing, and think about how that can complement getting those objectives met without feeling overwhelmed of having to do that work on their behalf.
Thank you so much, Monique. I look forward to the watch party in Nova Scotia is going to be featuring this recording at the DVDLI Afrocentric Learning Institute, and continuing the work that we've been doing at CREA and in relationship, as well as the CES and AEA and AFREA. So
that's beautiful. Keep me connected so I can
yes.
be part of it. I see the love. I really, really appreciate the opportunity to connect and talk deeper about this. I've had a great time and really thankful for just all the work the organization is doing for us to continue to have these conversations.